Welcome back, listeners, to the Academy I3 podcast. Today, we are absolutely thrilled to have Maria Garay-Serratos. She has an MSW and a PhD and is a domestic violence dash traumatic brain injury, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, that's a long one, expert and thought leader. Her life's mission is to create global awareness to address the silent and unrecognized DV, TBI, CT pandemic. Dr. Garay-Serratos is currently the founder and CEO of Panfila Domestic Violence Hope Foundation and the protagonist and associate producer of and DV TBI CTE expert consultant for This Hits Home, which is a feature documentary released in 2023. Her work and story have also been the focus of various media and social media articles, interviews, including NPR, the National Desk Spotlight on America, USC News, the Global Good Podcast, HuffPost, the Los Angeles Times, Boston University CTE Center, and Concussion Legacy Foundation. Prior to founding Panfila and involvement with This Hits Home, Dr. Garay served as a C-level executive for over 25 years for various nonprofit organizations. She attended Pitzer College in Claremont, California, where she earned her undergraduate degree in sociology. Her graduate studies were in the Suzanne Dvorak Peck School of Social Work at the University of Southern California, where she earned both a master's degree and a doctorate. Dr. Garay's unique background as a first-generation Mexican immigrant, DV, TBI, CTE child survivor, her DV, TBI, CTE journey with her mother, her experience and academic preparation qualifies her to provide DV, TBI, CTE training, education, and awareness. She's also qualified to address equity issues that are leaving marginalized DV victims at greater risk for head trauma. An immense wealth of experience, and we're so happy to have her today. So let me turn it over to Shane to be able to start us off with our first question with Dr. Garay.
Thanks, Charlie. All right, Dr. Garay, our first question is, can you describe how your background in brain health, specifically in traumatic brain injury, connects to DEI challenges in the workplace, and particularly within child welfare?
First of all, thank you so much, Shane and Charlie, for having me here. It's an honor, and I'm just very humbled to be here and talking about this really critical issue, specifically as it relates to child welfare and DEI challenges in the workplace. My background and my story are very tied to this issue, and specifically with the documentary that was filmed, This Hits Home. It really highlighted the issue of traumatic brain injury and chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, as it relates to the domestic violence population. My mother's case is the most severe case to date that was linked to CTE and really cemented it, saying that we can no longer ignore the domestic violence population. So very linked to this issue. Unfortunately, in the documentary, what we didn't talk about was other critical issues that really impact marginalized women like my mother, who is an immigrant woman. For example, the issues of chronic stress, intersectionality, health disparities, and disproportionality. So my life's mission is to really bring awareness of this unrecognized, first of all, epidemic, which I believe is a pandemic based on global statistics and domestic violence. But equally important is to really help society optimize health, brain health, especially among marginalized individuals with brain injuries. So brain health is increasingly becoming more important to brain science as it is a disease with really considerable economic impact, often affecting the workplace. So I'm going to just provide a little bit of background, and I'm going to tie it all in as to why it's so important, especially in the child welfare field. So let's start with an overview of traumatic brain injury and just the statistics that we know that are relevant to the child welfare field. I don't think people know just how much our brains are just so susceptible to trauma. So, for example, pushing and shoving and shaking or throwing the body that moves the brain or the head itself really results in some what we call mild traumatic brain injury and moderate and severe brain injury. But because most of the trauma that people sustain in this country is mild, we're gonna stick to mild traumatic brain injuries, and also we have a time constraint, right? It becomes really important for us to recognize the symptoms associated with traumatic brain injury, both acute, meaning the symptoms that arise right away after you sustain a traumatic brain injury, and long-term or secondary symptoms. So the acute symptoms are loss of consciousness, headaches, dizziness, nausea, and fatigue. Some of the long-term, and we'll cluster them around physical, cognitive, behavioral, which is for physical symptoms, you still have those persistent migraine headaches. You could feel fatigue, muscle weakness, and difficulty swallowing, for example. And then there's the sensory challenges, which is like having blurred vision, ringing in the ear, a bad taste in the mouth. Motor skills, vestibular difficulties, and vestibular difficulties are really just balance issues. You feel like you're losing your balance, or you feel like your gait is off. That's another symptom. Cognitive, just the overall executive functioning challenges that you might experience, really problems with concentration, processing information, and all that domain. Then we have the behavioral, which is really challenges with socializing, impulsiveness, restlessness, fidgeting or pacing, difficulty starting tasks, those kinds of things. I also want to really focus on non-concussive head impacts. We have another type of mild traumatic brain injury that does not show through symptoms. These are called non-concussive head impacts. All types of trauma to the head are linked to potentially developing progressive neurodegenerative diseases such as CTE, Alzheimer's, and other types of dementias. These dementias, have their own unique disease constellation. So on top of traumatic brain injury, you now have these progressive neurodegenerative diseases. And I want to highlight CTE because my mother's case, again, is the first one linked to CTE, a public case from domestic violence. So these CTEs right now can only be diagnosed post-mortem. It is caused by repetitive non-concussive head impacts. Again, those ones that don't have symptoms. Not everyone, so I want to really make this really clear as you're listening to this podcast, not everyone who sustained a head impact or sustained a non-concussive impact means that you're going to develop CTE. We are talking about repetition, and it accumulates over time. So this is why it's so important for us to really be aware of what's happening to our brains. And just really the prevalence of traumatic brain injury in the country is pretty startling, even though the CDC is unable to collect data around for the whole country for lots of reasons. For example, they don't collect data on the DB population, even though they're a very high risk for this. And then issues of tracking data with racial and ethnic groups becomes really difficult just because how do they categorize it in different health arenas. But it really points to a devastating issue. Traumatic brain injury is a leading cause of disability and death, not just in the United States, but globally. In the United States, there's 2.8 million individuals that sustain TBI annually. 5.3 children, youth, and adults are living with TBI disability just on an annual basis. 50% of individuals who sustain or suspect that they have suffered a concussion do not seek care. And as I mentioned earlier, 80% of TBI are mild TBI. So now let's look at risk groups for TBI because it becomes really relevant to our discussion on child welfare. So the risk groups for TBI are ethnic and racial minorities, the housing insecure, military service members and veterans, children, older adults, individuals in detention centers, and I already mentioned the domestic violence population. There are also health disparities that we need to look at. So ethnic and racial minority individuals with head trauma face barriers to receiving any type of care or proper care. It's also important to recognize the intersection of DV with child welfare, which is at 30 to 60%. For this specific cohort, emerging TBI points to a silent and unrecognized epidemic in the focus of my life. And I just want to really quickly share some of the statistics. 75 to 90% of female victims of domestic violence. So think about 75 to 95%, depending on the study that you're looking at, report a history of traumatic brain injury. That's a lot. Then we have 60 to 90% of men with abusive histories reporting a history of traumatic brain injury. And then we have children. 60% of children, like me, who are abused also suffer traumatic brain injury. Then we have brain science facts that I want to share. Again, they're going to be very relevant to our discussion. Women sustain more brain injury than men in similar sports and often take longer to recover. Our brains are just, there's reasons why we're not as strong. We have, of course, TBI impacts a child's brain development in its long term. And then once injured, a brain can never really go back to baseline. By 2050, dementia cases will double. And TBI, now that you've heard all this, TBI was just this year, like a few months ago, recognized as a chronic condition. So I also want to talk about stress because that's really critical to the discussion we're having. And it's uncommon, it's not uncommon to feel disorganized and forgetful when you're under a lot of stress at work, but over the long term, chronic stress may actually change your brain in ways that affect your memory and other domains like what we're going to talk about. Employees impacted by long-term exposure to chronic stress may experience similar symptoms to employees with traumatic brain injury. So just let me share a little bit of them. And just if you can remember what I talked about with traumatic brain injury, you're going to see the similarities. So cognitive, we have the confusion and memory problems. The physical, the fatigue, the headaches, the dizziness, chronic pain, jittersness, loss of appetite. Behavior, we have antisocial behavior, increased alcohol or drug consumption, depression, anger, irritability, feelings of hopelessness and isolation. So chronic stress scientifically can accelerate, it's been proven scientifically that can accelerate brain aging and also increase the risk of developing progressive neurodegenerative diseases, just as the dementias we just talked about, including Alzheimer's disease. Hence, optimal brain health and diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in the workplace are intrinsically linked, especially in child welfare. Let me quickly outline how brain health might be impacted among the child welfare workforce. First of all, the workforce itself is not exempt from brain trauma. It is a microcosm of the larger society. So some of them may be experiencing or experienced in the past DV-TBI or just head trauma, which might be impacting their workplace performance. Period. Then we have employees exposed to chronic stress. Research tells us that today's workplace is highly stressed. So stressed that in a recent survey, 70% of respondents said that they've experienced the most stressful working year of their lives. 70%. That's a lot. And 85% reported that stress at work negatively impacted home life. So 85% of us are saying that stress has really impacted my life. We already discussed how chronic stress impacts brain health. Child welfare has unique stressors, really high stressors. There is 30% to 40% turnover in child welfare just because of the high stress, right? In the cases that are being seen with children being abused and youth and trying to navigate a lot of systems to help children and youth stay safe. They often experience primary and secondary trauma. And employees from marginalized groups are highly at risk for TBI, as we've discussed earlier. They are also facing systemic barriers that leave them disproportionately affected when it comes to brain health. So that's how this all ties in. And this is why I'm here. And it's such a privilege to be here talking about this issue.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, no, you've brought in such a foundational knowledge there to give statistics and critical information of what it really means, this topic, and then also the impact that it has on our workforce as well. And I think it's one of those things where it could initially feel jarring and it just, whoa, like this is actually part of this line of work. And I think for listeners to really tune into it and seeing as informative and seeing what is it that I don't know? What is more that I can learn about this that'll help inform me to choose how I want to navigate in my workplace moving forward. So to build on that a little bit more, you did mention intersectionality. One of the questions that we did want to bring to you as well was, what are some of the common misconceptions about brain health that affect workplace dynamics? So especially among marginalized groups like Latinx, Native American, and our LGBTQ plus employees.
Thank you, Charlie. And you're absolutely correct. I totally agree with you. This is alarming information. And so I just want to repeat that just because you've had traumatic brain injury and you've experienced chronic stress, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to lead to these devastating issues. But being well informed means that you can track how you're feeling. So I appreciate you saying that. The purpose is not to scare people, but to inform the population, to inform the workforce so we can seek more information and clarification, and if necessary, seek care. So thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. So some of the misconceptions, I think one of the primary ones is only physical trauma impacts your brain health. And as we just discussed, this is not true. We already talked about chronic stress at work can be just as damaging to brain health. So just be really mindful of that. Then we have a bump on the head or trauma to the body that impacts the head is okay to ignore. As I shared, 50% of individuals who think that they've had trauma to their head or sustained a concussion don't get care. We think nothing is wrong. This is false. Head trauma and chronic stress have an accumulative effect that I just shared in the beginning. Not knowing the symptoms means you are not getting the proper care, and this can lead to many challenges at work and in your daily life. We also think that the brain can heal itself from trauma because we've heard a lot about neuroplasticity and how powerful the brain is. Again, this is false because when you have been sustaining a lot of trauma to the head, especially non-concussive head impacts, which for me are very frightening because you don't get any symptoms, it's not going to go back. Your brain is pretty much damaged. That's what the science is saying, that once brain cells are dead, there's nothing much you could do to regenerate them. So we need to be really careful with that. Then we have this, because we watch it on TV, especially for those of us who are sports fanatics, like the NFL players that put on the helmets. We think that helmets are meant to protect our brains. And it's false, but I also want to make it really clear that I support wearing helmets, okay? I'm not here to say you should not wear a helmet. Please wear your helmets, but it does not protect your brain. So Shane is going to do is show us a great video, a little GIF that demonstrates what happens to the brain when it's bumped. Either you bump yourself or somebody pushes you. So let's see what happens to the brain. I want you to notice the process is called coup counter coup. This injury occurs when a sudden jolt to the head is caused by the brain to bounce inside the skull, resulting in damage at the initial impact, which is called the coup. And then the opposite side of the brain, the counter coup, essentially hitting the skull twice in rapid succession to the force of the impact. It essentially bounces around inside the skull. So you see, our brains don't have a lot of room to maneuver in the skull. So you're hitting your brain, it's being injured. So what happens? So this delicate tissue is stretching, it's twisting, and potentially damaging nerve cells due to the rapid movement. There's also bruising, bleeding, and other forms of brain tissue damage, depending the severity of the jolt. And I want to highlight that in domestic violence situations, the head is not just injured once, you have multitudes of injuries happening during one episode of domestic violence. All of this leads to chemical changes within the brain, which can result in concussion, non-concussions, or other traumatic brain injury. Shane, thank you so much for showing that GIF. I think it's a really powerful illustration of what happens to the brain. I know it could be really alarming to see that, but again, we want to educate the workforce, right? I think the other one that is a myth is that brain health can be optimized. And again, I'm talking about chronic stress and traumatic brain injury. And we're like, okay, this is not going to get better. We know that TBI is difficult to overcome and long-term exposure to chronic stress is challenging to reverse. Often long-term care is needed. However, we still have an ethical obligation to ensure everyone in the workplace reaches optimal brain health. The brain is a powerful organ able to heal and reconnect. Neuroplasticity offers an avenue to reach optimal brain health in the workplace. It signifies the inherent capacity of the brain to restructure its neural pathways and synaptic connections in response to learning experiences and environmental stimuli even after trauma. So it really offers us a way for DEI brain health initiatives to look at how do we develop strategies. The last one, I think, which is also a powerful myth, it says individuals with brain health challenges don't face stigma and discrimination. This is false. Sadly, discrimination and prejudice can be amplified for those who experience traumatic brain injury and identify as LGBTQ+ or are from other marginalized groups. Safe places to help individuals confront and overcome these issues are really critical. They can offer education, resource, and advocacy for inclusivity and acceptance, ultimately working to reduce stigma and discrimination. I think because we don't understand, because the brain injury is an invisible injury, we tend to judge individuals who are perhaps not processing information the way we are, or perhaps we're in meetings and they seem to be slower. Perhaps they're experiencing a lot of trauma to the head that they've had. So anyways, those are some of the the more, I think, misconceptions we have as in the public and the workplace that doesn't allow us to take that trauma to the head or chronic stress a little bit more seriously.
So expanding on that, like how does the concept of brain health go beyond just avoiding disease? And how can that expanded definition be integrated into workplace DEI efforts?
Thank you, Jane. I think that's a really great question. In addition to mitigating brain or brain self challenges, promoting optimal brain health just in overall is really critical to the workforce. So brain science can inform the workplace on how to integrate brain health within DEI efforts. Just because we need to look at what is the brain? What does it do? So then we understand why it's important to look beyond just diseases, right? Regardless of disease, we need to focus on the brain. The brain is a great organ. It's probably the greatest organ we have, right? It controls our actions and the mediator of all our experiences. The most critical skills and capabilities and abilities for employees today are centered in the brain. For example, analytical thinking, critical thinking, resilience, flexibility, and agility, motivation and self-awareness, and just being curious, right? All are important lifelong learning abilities. What does neuroplasticity science tell us? Again, I just show what it tells us about the brain, that it can reconnect, right? Even a brain that is traumatized. So I mentioned that early. And it could provide us on how to focus DI brain health initiatives in the workplace or how to develop them to maximize impact, okay, and curiosity. So I'm going to give you a few examples of how we can use neuroplasticity to maximize DEI efforts to optimize brain health. So microlearning and repetition, I recommend breaking down DE brain health initiatives into small and focused lessons or educational virtual or in-person trainings and repeat them in venues where staff are present, such as staff meetings or staff retreats, right? Or you're doing staff reconnecting with staff, building the team. Repeated exposure to inclusive practices helps form new neural pathways. The strategy can gradually reshape a collective workplace mindset, making it feel less forced, right? So it's fun, making it feel inclusive and less forced. So that's really important. So again, repeated learning and repetition into small pieces. Then I would recommend, based on neuroplasticity, is really to develop DEI brain initiatives from an emotional engagement and diversity. And what does this mean? So the brain forms stronger neural connections when emotions are involved. Okay, so because when we feel like this podcast, you're learning about something really traumatic and you're going to probably listen a little bit more. So emotions are really critical. So focus lessons or educational recommend creating workplace experience that inspire positive emotions associated with brain health, diversity, inclusions, like I just said. For example, organize brain health weeks where employees share how they take care of their brain. So this is like a mutual learning experience, how they overcome brain health difficulties, what they eat to boost brain health, and other relevant brain health stories really can help rewire brains to view brain health as an enriching, positive experience and not just a compliance issue, right? It makes it normal and you're sharing all these fun stories, right? So the other thing that multi-city tells us is that really we need to involve multi-sensory in learning experiences. For example, using VR simulations can be used to help employees understand how to maintain optimal brain health. A multi-sensory approach can result in more engaging and memorable learning experience and allows employees to gain knowledge about brain health. So that's just engaging all the senses. Physical activity becomes really important. Engage in physical exercise routine as a team. That's really critical. Physical activity is scientifically proven to improve brain health, and in doing so, a team can strategically strengthen relationships and team spirit. So try to exercise with your team, even if it's a short walk, right? During lunch or after lunch, however, whatever your schedule allows you to do. Now, let's talk about healthy eating. So healthy food equals healthy brain. I don't know if most of the listeners realize that the brain makes up, yes, a very small portion of our bodies, but it uses a whopping 25% of everything we eat. So 25%. What does that say? We got to eat really healthy to keep that optimal brain functioning just at its max.
Oh, that is so fascinating.
Mm.
These are things that like we never stop to think about it like, whoa, like how much of an impact these different things have on our body, but also ultimately on our brain. So yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Mhm.
And so you've mentioned a little bit about this already, but to if there's more that you would want to add, you have talked about intersectionality as a determinant of brain health. Is there more that you can elaborate on of how the intersection of identities, so race, gender, sexual orientation, impacts brain health in the workplace?
I'd love to address that, Charlie, because that's part of the reason why my mom is one of the worst cases, the worst case to date related to CTE. But in the workplace, specifically in child welfare, it's again a microcosm of the larger society. And as such, the intersectionality of identities also impacts brain health in the workforce. For example, I'm going to talk about the domestic violence population and ethnic and racial in diverse individuals which are at higher risk for TBI. In addition, for a variety of intersectionality factors and health disparities, domestic violence rates are higher among racial and ethnic women in communities, as well as the LGBTQ plus community. And sadly, many don't seek care. Let's quickly consider these domestic violence and workplace statistics to get a perspective on the intersectionality of DEI and brain health in the workplace among the domestic violence population, which I'm sure is also present in the child welfare field, just because we know that 1 in 3 women are abused and 1 in 4 men are abused. 64% of domestic violence victims report their ability to work is affected by the abuse. 64%. And I know we're talking about a lot of numbers, but I really want to emphasize that's a lot. 64%. 44% of full-time employed adults in the US reporting experiencing the effect of domestic violence in the workplace. So we're walking in with these experiences to our workplace. We don't just leave our private lives at home, right? So I want you to imagine the type of chronic stress they are experiencing at work and in the impact of their brain health. That's just one part, right? As I shared earlier, women are especially susceptible and take longer to heal from TBI than men. And we just have to consider how many women are working in the child welfare workforce. Just think about that. And then I want to again highlight children, even though children are not working in child welfare, but they are the focus of child welfare. And so it's really important to remember that our children are sustaining high levels of TBI and dying or disabled as a result. In fact, for children under 4, it is the leading cause of death. So we have to remember that. Now, TBI risks for racial and ethnic individuals are high, as we discussed before, and health disparities prevent them from getting care or proper care. At work, they are most likely experiencing other types of unique chronic stressors, posing even greater risk to their brain health. So let me just exemplify. What do I mean by that? Employees or individuals with multiple marginalized identities may constantly feel at edge to perceive threats of discrimination. So like microaggressions in the form of subtle, often unintentional discriminatory comments or behaviors can accumulate over time, causing significant psychological distress and impacting cognitive performance, again, impacting brain health. Then we have internalized stigma. Individuals may experience negative stereotypes about their identities, leading to lowered self-esteem, self-doubt, and decreased motivation. What is the result of all of this? If this is an increased level of anxiety among these particular individuals from marginalized backgrounds, depression and cognitive function decline due to the constant brain strain of navigating potentially difficult or hostile work environment based on a multiple marginalized identities. The cumulative effect of multiple forms of discrimination can have a more severe impact on brain health compared to experiencing only one form of discrimination or barrier. Again, we have all these fears, right, going on for some of us, unfortunately.
You've mentioned that typically folks who are experiencing TBI or chronic stress do so undiagnosed, so they're not aware that they're actually experiencing those conditions. So what can be done in the workplace rather to support those individuals, and then particularly those who work in high stress environments?
Thank you. Thank you, Shane. This is why I'm here. One of the biggest things that workplace can do is really, and I would recommend form a DEI brain health committee because it needs to be systematic and embedded within the organization. Because individuals are unaware, that little bump to the head that they had when they went out with their friend, and then perhaps that they've played some kind of sport when they were young, that it could be related to some of the symptoms they're experiencing. So what needs to be done? What I recommend is really having this committee, whose main goal needs to focus on raising awareness about brain health, period. That really focuses on talking about what is brain health, okay? How brain health is impacted with specific focus on TBI and chronic stress and other forms of injuries that can happen to your brain, but specifically that symptoms that they should be looking out for and how they might be affecting the work performance. Obviously, they need to really target the information also that really looks at the health disparities that we were just talking about in high-risk groups, especially women and some of the other groups that we were talking about. And then strategies to optimize brain health. The HR department really should be a place of resource, support, referrals, and information. So really critical. Just get this information out to your workplace. But what can we do for employees in high-risk roles, such as frontline workers? I'm gonna talk about this specific one because I think just because of the population that is served, the children, the youth, the foster parents, the families, the communities, they are also experience high levels of traumatic brain injury, whether it's from domestic violence or from playing sports or from activities. Just they can be a source of chronic stress for the workers. I really advocate to teach and train the workforce on the population they're serving. Let me share why. A lot of the symptoms that show up and how they're showing up can be in the form of having somebody think that the child or the family or the parents that they're serving, that they can come across as resistant, non-compliant, unfocused, remember, because the cognitive abilities are really impacted, unable to follow through with goals and case plans, especially if they're now experiencing progressive neurodegenerative diseases. Okay, because remember, we talked about traumatic brain injury and then neuroprogressive disease, and then the chronic stress, right? So they're now unable to follow through with goals and case plans. They may feel distracted. They just might look like they're apathetic. And so what do we think is that they're just not interested? And that could be a great source of frustration. Some of the symptoms that you see mimic other stuff like PTSD and depression. So again, really pitching to really train the workforce, really critical. So now let's focus on the employees that are really in chronic stress positions, which could be frontline workers and others. What can you do? I recommend that you listen to your body. Listen to your body. Often a headache doesn't necessarily mean you sustain a traumatic brain injury, but it really means that your body and your brain needs rest. Your body is telling that you're overloaded. I recommend that you reduce your lap time and screen time immediately. Take a little break, take a short walk. Listen to music that you close your eyes, change your gaze, and breathe. Just simple things like that. Visualize something that makes you happy, something to just really boost you. Talk to your supervisor about how you are feeling, especially if you're feeling worse, or seek HR support for resources. And if you don't want to do that, I still urge you to please seek neurological care or traumatic brain injury care. Talk to your primary physician. Now let's consider employees that are experiencing brain trauma or traumatic brain injuries. They can really benefit from working in quiet or quieter spaces. And again, this is a discussion they would have to have with their supervisor to modify the work environment. But it's really important for them to reduce bright lights. Sensitivity to light is a big symptom of traumatic brain injury. And then noise reduction. So having too much noise, it really exacerbates somebody who's experiencing traumatic brain injury. So noise reduction becomes really critical, reducing distractions, and then reassess the office decor and the colors. I really pitch for green. Green scientifically has been proven to calm the brain. So maybe that's why we take short walks outside and we see all this beautiful greenery and we feel better. So I just want to share that, okay? Routinely take breaks from screen time and smartphones. Keep lists of goals and things that need to be done and when. Focus on one task at a time. Break large or complex tasks into small ones that are doable for you. Incorporate short breaks throughout the workday. practice deep breathing and exercise. And again, if you're experiencing these symptoms after your workforce has educated you on this, I would recommend that you seek HR support for further help and resources. And again, if that's not available or you don't want to do that, I would highly recommend that you seek neurological care or TBI care or talk to your primary physician for referrals.
No wonder why I love going out to see green when I go for a walk. Like there's a reasoning behind that. I love that. Okay, okay. And I love that you're now going into sort of these really strategic and actionable items that individuals can do, organizations can do. Um, Beyond that, I know one of the questions we'll look to ask, and you've mentioned a little bit already, but like how can organizations start to ensure that brain health awareness becomes a core part of their DEI strategy rather than just an afterthought? And I think you mentioned a little bit about like potentially looking into starting some sort of committee or work group. Is there more than that you would recommend?
Absolutely, especially after being an executive for so many years. I think it starts with leadership. They need to message and model the importance of DEI brain health within the culture of the organization. It needs to be included in the strategic plan and vision for the organization. However, I want to shout out for the workforce. I think when they see an issue that's critical, and if you have exceptional leadership, that they will listen. So employees have a voice in this, express your voice. Then you have to assess whether there's organizational readiness. It needs to be sustainable and long-term. So allocation of resources is critical. This means capacity, funding, and overall, again, organizational readiness. Can we do this, right? Then again, that brain health committee, which is so important. However you want to label it, DEI, I have it as a DBI brain health committee that will really message to the workforce how serious the organization and administration and leadership is about this. It is a priority. The committee I recommend should really be inclusive and representative of the entire workplace, workforce, especially those with brain injuries and perhaps those that are experiencing chronic stress, like the ones we talked about. Committee members need to be trained also on brain health and kept informed about best practice, including head trauma, chronic stress, and neuroplasticity. Brain science is constantly changing. I just want to give an example. I don't know if some of you remember the movie Concussion that really highlighted the issue of CTE and the NFL. Well, a few years later, they found that it's not the concussions, it's these non-concussive head impacts. So you've left an entire society feeling that it's these concussions, it's these non-concussive head impacts that are correlated with CTEs. So it's important for the committee to be kept informed about the latest science on traumatic brain injury, neuroplasticity, and all those kinds of things. Very important. They can also really then in turn develop or host trainings and in-services and develop collateral materials and information and resources. I think it really needs to be important to have DEI brain health policies and procedures. And the committee with leadership needs to really monitor progress and modifications accordingly. Of course, accountability is critical, and it's really important to measure success.
I'm curious, are you aware of any examples of workplace policies or initiatives that have successfully addressed brain health? And if so, how these have influenced inclusivity and equity within that organization?
You know what, Shane? I have not. What I do know is at a global level, the Global Brain Health Institute is promoting DEI and brain health. However, when I did my little research, I am not aware of any social service agency really specifically focused on DEI brain health. What I am seeing is this confusion, and I do want to say that it is a confusion. Brain health is not mental health. So I see a lot of DEI efforts and saying, oh, we're doing brain health. So I went in and looked, and this is mental health, which again is important, but it's not brain health. So I have not seen that. And I think it's because brain injury is invisible. So employees can't see it and don't know enough about it to realize how it might be impacting the workforce. So again, this is an opportunity, I believe, for the child welfare to be an issue leader and really show how they're going to do it and perhaps scale up best practices all over California and the rest of the country. But I have not seen that yet.
Even then, for you to say that and you are an expert in this field, that's really telling. That really shows that there isn't something like that out there, and that sort of provides an opportunity for organizations to really consider that and see how much of an impact that could have for different communities. Okay. We're coming to our final few questions that we have here today. So I know one of our final few questions is, what are the potential long-term benefits for organizations that prioritize brain health, particularly in terms of employee retention, morale, and just overall performance?
Okay. There could be real immediate overall benefits, including just higher morale, happier staff, they feel valued, they feel respected, feeling heard. There could be a reduction in burnout and stress. They feel healthier, they feel better. They know the symptoms that are related to brain health, and they perhaps are understanding why they're not feeling well and not performing optimally. Wow, now they're getting all this education, and not only are they getting the education, but they're actually getting DEI brain health tools that they can use and perhaps in services. So this is wonderful. So what does this mean? Improved productivity, overall work performance, work participation, more engaged in teamwork, more engaged in the respective roles. You would probably see really a reduction in sick time or absenteeism. Then retention becomes really critical. So people feeling more like they belong because they feel more invested, because they feel heard. So just so many wonderful things that can happen.
Right. And then our final question, looking ahead to the future, and as you've illustrated, there really aren't a lot of examples of effective integration of brain health in organizations' DEI initiatives. How do you envision the future of workplace DEI efforts to evolve to include a stronger focus on brain health? And what advice would you give organizations who would like to prioritize brain health in their workplace initiatives?
I envision a workplace focused on optimizing brain health through DEI, through a DEI alliance, while also embracing the latest science on how to support individuals living with brain trauma and chronic stress. That outcome is a workforce performing at its capacity, feeling supported and uplifted, like we just discussed. And so what advice would I give is, first and foremost, is get informed. I urge organizations to get informed about brain health and how brain health impacts the workplace, especially ones like child welfare, where high stress is inherent in what you do and what we do. I would especially encourage them to learn about how to support optimal brain health and how to address the workforce impacted by head trauma and chronic stress. What does this mean for your organization? And really, can you afford to ignore brain health? Once you get all this information, I hope that it will be a positive response, right? Leadership plays a key role, like we said, in transforming DEI brain health initiatives into part of the culture of an organization. But again, like I shared before, I think the workforce can influence leadership by articulating the need for DEI brain health efforts. So voice your concerns. Consider if you can strategically implement a DEI brain health initiative, because the worst thing that you could do is say you're going to do it and then it can't be done. Again, have that organizational readiness lens. The commitment, is it there? The capacity, is it funding? And not just one-time funding, but sustainable funding. Do we have the individuals that we can get started, or do we train them, and how do we keep them, right? So start smart. What does that mean? Don't take the entire initiative on. Maybe you start small. Think of what is the one thing that you really are seeing in your workplace that's impacted perhaps by brain health. And can you address it through a DEI brain health initiative? If you have the resources, I would recommend you assess and survey the entire organization about brain health, just to get a sense if they know what this is, and develop your strategic plan accordingly. It's important to develop an inclusive DEI brain health strategy based on resources. Don't overpromise, be realistic, like I just shared. I encourage organizations to embrace a neuroplasticity-driven and overall brain science approach to embed DEI brain health efforts within the fiber of the workforce. Don't just do it in a vacuum. Look at the science. What is the science saying? Like I shared with you, we had that movie Concussion come out and saying, this is what's happened to the NFL players. And then a few years later, it's these non-concussive head impacts. So lots of information coming out about brain science. I would recommend that you monitor and modify as you implement your strategy. But I think it's doable, and I really am so happy that could be like where we're going in the future with brain health.
Dr. Garay, I want to thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your experience here with us today. It's been a fantastic conversation. To our listeners as well, thank you for joining us in today's episode where we talked about the intersection of DEI and brain health. We hope you found this discussion as enlightening and inspiring as we did. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more conversations with experts who are making a difference in the world of DEI. If you have any questions or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. And until next time, stay committed to making the world a more inclusive place.